All right. Hi, guys. I realized I hadn't made any recording just to say hello to you guys. And many of my students are seeing them that I made before I had my operation, and I've had it now. It's been a little over a week. Close your eyes for a minute. If it's not that much, there's lots of tape over it, but you can get an idea of the how big the incision is, I guess. And like I said, just it's gruesome. Close your eyes. Be warned. And then I'll tell you when, so you can see it. I don't even really know what it looks like myself. Okay, now if I'm turned back around, they fused together my C3 through T1, so that is the C. It's like six of them, right? C3, C4, C5, C6, C7, and T1. So T1 is just at a level of your shoulder girdle here, your so-called pectoral girdle of bones. All right. So, anyways, I'm Dr. Harry Tiemann. Dr. Harry, I guess a few people have already written to me, I think. I don't know. Oh, yeah, to remind you, if you send me a message, always add in, like, if it's through Canvas, of course, it'll tell me what class, but, I'll get to know you guys, especially if we're in person. But any email or texting, it'd be great if you say, hey, this is so-and-so from 1110 or 12. That's in this case, that's enough. So who is Dr. Harry? See, this is all I took some classes, really odd. I took these classes about how to design the Canvas page, and I've already been working on these very things for the longest time. So I rearranged it a little because I wanted the contact info to be at the beginning. So yeah, Dr. Tiemann, Dr. Harry is fine. And there's my cell phone number. And most help is done this way. Like things like I can't get the textbook to work, or little things like that are best served by email, because then I have this reminder in front of me. And by the way, whenever you need me to do something, it's all right to remind me, like every 24 hours or even every 12 hours if the deadline is coming up. I'm definitely the absent-minded scientist. So if you're working on something, you can take your phone, take a picture of it, and like in your guys' case, mostly it's going to be your logbooks. I mean, if you're working on a report, you can just send me the file. So then I write something out, I take a picture, and I send it back to you. Sometimes I can even mark up your pic, because my phone has this stylus thing. All right, yeah, and look, don't worry, I don't answer the phone in general unless after 9 p.m. However, if you really need me, do like my children used to do and still do occasionally, is just message me over and over, and I'll just have to. I'll stop ignoring it. Okay. Yeah, my email address on the syllabus. So yeah, I've mostly been a researcher. This is start of my ninth semester at Cal State. Isn't that something? And so I spent most of my professional life as a researcher. And I'm a hardware designer, and I'm very much into elementary particle physics, looking at the very most simplest rules of Mother Nature. And we used to always say high energy physics. That was always a moving target, but it's just branched into so many things nowadays. I am actually a graduate of Cal State LA, which I think is very cool, especially, and makes it very cool to be a professor here. Way back in 1984, there's a chance that that was before your parents were born. Goodness gracious. Could that be true? No. Almost, right? You're born in 84, you have a kid at 20, 2004, and they would graduate high school in 2022. Okay, good. So it's not likely it's not likely that I'm older than your parents yet. Soon. I mean, you guys are all younger than my kids, who are 28 and 30. Almost all of you. So let's see. Then I'm from New York, and I went back there for a variety of reasons, and I started a contracting business in the middle of that. It was really boring, so I went up to the local university that was a university near my house, and there were several colleges, and that had a physics department as well. And I said, hey, it's boring being a contractor. Do you have some kind of program that'll, like in 2 years, I could finish and get back into science? And they said, yeah, we have this so-called MSI, Masters of Science in Instrumentation. And I started that in 1990, finished at the end of 92. And this is where I got hooked, because when I was an undergraduate, when I started at UCLA, they wouldn't let us look at when I tried to go see what the grads were doing in various parts of the physics building, they would chase me away. And I've since found that UCLA doesn't really take very good care of their students and postdocs and things. And at Cal State, certainly, they had equipment here, and we had quite a department back then. But, I was young, and I lived on the beach in Santa Monica, and I had other things in my mind. But when I was in that MSI program, I took a course that part of it was we took a field trip to the local national lab, and I got to see the particle accelerator and the detectors and all that, and I learned something about the physics behind them, and I was hooked. So ever since about 91. And, a lot of things have happened in between 92 and 2011. But at some point I thought I'd go back and I'd get my PhD, which I did in 2011, again at Stony Brook. And I'll talk about other things I did in a moment. But just before coming here, I was in the Republic of Korea for 3.5 years. At the Center for Axion and Precision Physics. Whew, I can tell why I shouldn't be lecturing yet. Boy, I'm already getting tired. I said that at Center for Axion and Precision Physics. I think I said that. An old friend of mine, an acquaintance at Brookhaven, I never really knew him, and he worked in a different group, had applied to become a director, and I'd known him for 25 years. And he got accepted as a director to create a new research center. And he told me, "Come on, Harry, I got a great job for you." And it sounded great. They told us $10 million a year for 10 years guaranteed, and no strings attached. Blue sky. Trouble is, it eventually got worse and worse with auditing and all the other stuff going on, that it just got too much for me. My friend Giannis, my boss, is still there, but he has an obligation to the people he hired. And I really liked Korea, don't get me wrong. So anyways, when I did my master's work, we were working on detector development for proton-proton colliders. And then when it became clear that we were building an accelerator down in Texas, when it became clear that it was going to be canceled, I moved on to heavy ions. But it's still considered. Well, my PhD is officially in nuclear physics, but the nuclear physics of the day of 1990s was when you hit nuclei together or hit them with projectiles like protons, and you looked at the way they would spin and go to higher energy states. You didn't blast them apart like you do in a proton collision. And we started colliding these things together, heavy ions, to see what we could see. And this was somewhat smaller experiments than the proton collisions. See, I've noticed that the proton-proton collisions and then the heavy ion collision experiments weren't that much fun anymore, because you built a detector and the thing would run at 10 or 20 years, whereas historically the thing that caught my eye was you would design and build a detector, and then you would run it for you get so many hundreds of hours of particles sent your way. And then you would analyze the data, and then you would say, okay, we need a little more data, or we need to reconfigure the experiment, or we need to build a whole new one. And so you would be in there reconfiguring or rebuilding the experiment every year or so. I can remember going home to my parents' house and all dirty and greasy because we were out in this experimental hall with this big overhead crane, and my dad, who had been an engineer at Grumman, was saying, I thought you were a scientist. And I said, well, Dad, I'm an experimentalist. So then after I got my PhD, I worked on neutrino physics because I just wanted to work on smaller detectors. I worked on an experiment in China, in fact, and we won an award on a so-called Breakthrough Prize. It's a long story, but those experiments now have gotten to be monstrously huge. So then in Korea, we did so-called precision physics, where we were looking for hard-to-detect particles, like a thing called an axion, which we think might be what dark matter is made of. And then measuring precise characteristics of things, or electrons, and there's things called muons, and we can talk about that if you like another time. So now the next step is where I'm doing now, luckily, is gravity waves. I was worried. My wife was really worried that I was going to become bored here, because quite unlike the me of when I was an undergraduate and living on the beach, I'm quite the workaholic now, and I constantly need challenge. This is why I majored in physics in the first place. And in fact, I'm sure, hopefully, you guys are majoring in things that do that to you, that constantly make you feel challenged. And then you shouldn't feel bad about it, right? Because you're going to, it doesn't get easier the higher you go, but that's a good thing. And I've been very lucky to be invited to join gravity wave people at Cal State LA after they got to know me. Not for nothing. Remember, I mentioned we won an award, a Breakthrough Prize. So, I have a PhD from a very top department, and I don't like to make a big deal of it. I mostly like to tell people that I have a bachelor's degree from Cal State. Anyways, Richard Feynman is a longtime professor at Caltech, but he's been gone many years. He passed away in '88, but he's my hero. And he said we don't truly understand something until we can reduce it to a freshman lecture. For example, Einstein, when he published his relativity paper, there was only a couple people in the whole world who could read it and understand what he was talking about, or at least understand his arguments. Whether or not they could understand his conclusions was another story. But nowadays, we teach you a little bit of relativity, even maybe not in a freshman class. But it's been my motto for many years, because I only found out about him after he passed away when I visited Fermilab in Chicago in 90 or 91. I had actually gone to one of his lecture he gave, to public lecture at Caltech, with one of the professors here at Cal State back in the day, but I didn't know who he was then. But ever since I learned about him and his philosophy, I've always used it to to be the benchmark of my understanding of things. And I've always answered people's questions, and I've always explained things. Even when I was still a graduate student, a master's student, when we would come together, because, the particle accelerator is in one place. So everybody, even if you're in a university far away, you have to come there to take the data. Although that's not true anymore, but back then it was. And the grad students would be like not knowing what was going on, and I was always willing to answer their questions. So I always had a crowd around me, and I've always enjoyed explaining things. And the big reason besides just helping people, is that it helps me to understand physics better. So, as I said, I'm a Cal State LA grad. I'm a first-generation student. My parents had no idea what was going on with college. I'm the first person in my family that I'm aware of, at least from my dad's side, back to 1720. That's because my grandparents were immigrants from Germany. I'll get to that in a minute. There was no financial aid available. There was some, I suppose. I didn't take any. I was 2 years at UCLA, and then I transferred from UCLA to here. And you can see, I'm the blonde, blue-eyed surfer boy. But I grew up in this immigrant experience because of all four of my grandparents being immigrants, and all from Germany. So both of my parents were 100% German, and I'm 100% German, although, of course, I'm American. But, everybody looked like me at UCLA, but when I transferred here, I felt a lot more at home. When I told my parents I was going to California, they just said, well, we can't pay for that. Well, they were trying to keep me at home, too, but that's fine. I don't want you to. I needed, my parents, very strong-willed, I'm sure in Hispanic culture, many of you see that, but it's a strong community where everybody cares about everybody. My family's not quite that way anymore, maybe not yours as well, but I'm sure many of us here know something about that immigrant experience. So I worked at night, and I commuted from Santa Monica because even though, I transferred here, I originally thought I would go back until I realized that Cal State was a much better place for me. But I loved living on the beach. I had a shack that was really cheap, and I had my dog, and I went in the ocean a lot. And I also worked at night in a bar that was right on the border of Santa Monica and Venice. And Venice was pretty, it was quasi-dangerous back then. And this bar was a big tourist place. We'd have 500 people in there on the weekends. And I started out as a bouncer, and then a bar back, and I cooked for a while, and then a bartender. But I always, when a bartender is not allowed to leave their stations, but if I had a chance to help break up a fight, I always jumped in. Great way to relieve stress. In fact, I was the only person allowed to take on a fight one-on-one. We were supposed to always call for help, but they looked the other way because I loved to just jump into fights and toss people around. I was very buff back then. No, I didn't have a car, right? That's right. When I commuted from Santa Monica, I used to take a bus. There was no trains back then. There was a freeway flyer in the morning and the evening. If you missed that, it was like a 2.5-hour ride. And so I rode my bicycle a lot. I surfed a lot and played soccer, and so I was pretty buff back then. I already told you about I'm second generation. My parents were born here. And I also, for a while, not back then, of course, but I've been a single parent while I was in graduate school. So I kind of am familiar with all the challenges that all you guys face. And I also, Salazar Hall, right? Simpson Tower. This pretty much looks exactly the same. Other than these steel plates they put on after the, I don't know, when was that earthquake? 88? 87? I visited in 88 and saw those. And I also drive a pretty cool car. You may have seen it. Maybe not, since we've been home so long and presumably you're freshmen. Also now the Volkswagen bus I got to put on here that my daughter and I restored together. I'll get you a picture. So I'm going to stop this one because I realize that could be a great intro to any class. And I'm going to keep it for that purpose. So stay tuned.